Good morning.
Good morning.
If you know anything about me, you probably know that I love trees. At the last house we lived in, there was one tree in particular that captured my heart. This oak tree was perfectly framed by the kitchen window, and its stately presence was a comforting constant that brought me peace on many days as I admired it while cleaning up the kitchen, wrestling through the problems of the day, or whatever else was on my mind. It was positioned at the bottom of the hill, at the final bend in our driveway, just before the house came into view. I often imagined it bestowing a leafy blessing upon our family as we drove out into the world, and again as we returned safely home. Speaking of coming and going, one day in particular, almost 5 years ago now, stands out as a day marked with going. On August 18th of 2020, my kids attended their first day of school online due to the pandemic, and that turned out to be a blessing because that meant we were all together when we had to evacuate later that afternoon. Throughout the 2 days prior, we watched the progress of the river fire and were ready to go if it came to that, but never expected a second fire to start just miles from our house. After a few hours of quick decisions and hurried packing, our family drove down the driveway, passing under my beloved tree, car packed full, including 3 unhappy cats, and towing a trailer filled with the things we had deemed necessary in case our house burned down. Almost 7,000 acres, and 3 weeks later, the fire was contained and all evacuation orders were lifted. We were fortunate that our house was not impacted. However, the fire burned within 10 to 20 feet on all sides of the house, across both sides of our quarter-mile-long driveway. My husband was able to return to the property just a day after the fire went through. He talked with the firemen who had defended the house. Their trucks were still in our driveway, and hot spots were still burning and smoldering throughout the property. He took a video, and the scene was barely recognizable through the smoke. The trees and hillsides that had been covered with vegetation were now vaguely familiar in form, but stark and barren. Almost everything was burnt black. The sun glowed strangely through the smoke-blanketed atmosphere. We returned home 6 weeks later, after power poles had been replaced and the well water pumps were fixed. In the rush to leave, I had left clothes on a drying rack outside on the deck, and when I brought them in, I found holes burned through the cloth from flying embers. Our 16 chickens were dead. All the food in our fridge and garage freezer was ruined. We lost almost all our outdoor furniture and, of course, everything in the shed. And on top of everything, the large garden I had planted during COVID lockdown, including 3 citrus trees, all of it was gone. The smell of smoke was inescapable, inside and outside. The smallest breeze caused the ash to lift from the ground and swirl in little clouds before resettling. The tree at the bottom of the driveway still stood, but it was deeply charred, just a skeleton of its former majestic self. There were some leaves left, but they were brown and black, disintegrating when touched. It was anyone's guess if it was alive or not, and I guessed that it wasn't. Every day I left home and returned through a landscape that looked straight out of a dystopian movie. I buried my chickens, restocked my freezer. The air slowly cleared, and the sun shone brightly again in clear skies, but the blackened hills remained for miles in any direction I looked. Life went on. I resumed my post at the kitchen sink, but at times I couldn't bear to look at the tree. I was grieved over the loss of so many things and didn't want to be reminded of yet another, even as insignificant as a tree. I felt the loss deeply. I hoped and prayed and wished that it survived and did not die, but as time went on, there was absolutely no external indication that it would return to life. Some of the trees made it and others didn't. That's just how it was. Other trees in the area that were less impacted sent out new shoots almost right away. I tried not to despair, but wasn't very successful. As we've journeyed through the wilderness time of Lent, that tree has been on my mind. It has become for me a symbol of the barren, dead, hopeless places that we all have experienced at some time or another. And perhaps some of us are currently in a period of desolation. Lent is a solemn time of introspection and personal evaluation. What is there in each of us that reminds us of this image of a burnt tree? Something very good that was once vibrant and alive, and is now, for all appearances, dead, with no sign of life. You, like me, may have given up and fallen into despair. This is a heavy burden to carry. We may easily be pulled toward the temptation of concluding that things will never change. In the darkest of times, we can't possibly see how a situation can improve. Reassurances from others, shared with goodwill and meant to be comforting, often ring hollow and empty. I've done my fair share of nodding politely, reminding myself that they mean well, all while thinking, maybe it's true for them, but not for me. The deserts of our lives may be caused by our own choices, or the choices of others, or none of the above. Ultimately, life is difficult. Day after day, we may wonder if our prayers are heard. I've asked myself, does prayer even make a difference? Nothing is changing. And in fact, things are getting worse by all accounts. I've given up. I've given in to helplessness and despair. And honestly, what could be more reasonable, really, when all the evidence points to a dead end? Period. End of story. I'll quote part of the passage from today's reading in the Message translation. God is speaking through the prophet Isaiah and says, "Forget about what's happened. Don't keep going over old history. Be alert. Be present. I'm about to do something brand new. It's bursting out. Don't you see it? There it is. I'm making a road through the desert, rivers in the Badlands, because I provided water in the desert, rivers through the sun-baked earth, drinking water for the people I chose, the people I made especially for myself." God's people were facing turmoil and uncertainty in the land of their captors. They were facing immense suffering and disillusionment. They were feeling abandoned by God and mourning many losses. And in the middle of all that, a prophet speaks these words from God. "Do you see the new thing I'm doing?" I know for me, the answer is often no, I don't. I don't see it. Why aren't you answering me, God? Why aren't you taking me out of this difficult time of suffering and pain? Are you even there? I walk by sight so very often, not by faith. It's easy to forget in the dark what we knew in the light, especially when the darkness has lasted years, especially when the darkness is a predictable cycle, especially when we feel hopeless and powerless to change any of it. This is a difficult thing when we, being made in the image of a creative and imaginative God, cannot always make happen what we have the ability to imagine. We try and we expend so much energy pushing for the results we long for. But there is a part that only God can bring about, that for all our efforts only God can do. We reach the end of ourselves and are forced to wait. Lewis Smedes puts it like this: waiting is our destiny. As creatures who cannot by themselves bring about what they hope for, we wait in darkness for a flame we cannot light. We wait in fear for a happy ending we cannot write. We wait for a not yet that feels like a not ever. Waiting is the hardest work of hope. And like Israel, I often despair of hope, especially in times of intense, prolonged turmoil. The struggle wears me out, leaves me exhausted and weak. I reach the end of myself and conclude God has stopped listening or caring. It's at that point I feel like giving up. Continuing to hope feels pointless and silly, honestly. The Isaiah passage opens by recalling the Exodus and Israel's deliverance from slavery in Egypt. And then right after, God says to forget all that. Why would God instruct them to forget the ways of past deliverance? How strange. Maybe it's because they, like us, tend to have imaginations that are limited by what has or hasn't happened before. Maybe that contributes to our despair, because as amazing as it was when God delivered in the past, we cannot now imagine that type of deliverance ever occurring again. Or if we find ourselves in the same place again, maybe we blame ourselves and decide we don't deserve God's deliverance yet another time. Or perhaps God says to forget what has been done in the past because what is coming is so far beyond our human imagination that we cannot even begin to guess. And if we keep looking to the future, expecting God to act in the ways that we're familiar with, we just might miss what God is about to do. God promises to provide rivers of life in the desert. Flourishing in a wilderness is such a paradox. How is it possible? God promises the wasteland will become habitable. And not only that, the location of extensive flourishing for the people, the animals, and the land itself. How are newness and growth possible after a devastating fire, for example? We are reminded to believe God is doing a new thing even when, especially when, we cannot see it. Let us not despair. Let us wait in confidence and expectation. It may feel like we will be stuck in this desert forever. Since we can't imagine it any differently, we are tempted to believe it won't be any different than the present reality. I imagine this is similar to how the disciples felt when Jesus died. They knew beyond a shadow of doubt that dead people don't get up and live again. Yes, Jesus may have raised a few people from the dead when he was alive, but now he was dead, and so was his power, apparently. As the weeks turned into months, I gave up hope for my favorite driveway tree. I drove by it every day, yes, but my heart slowly lost the belief that it was alive. Other trees had begun to put out new shoots, but this one hadn't. I stopped looking. It was easier not to care. I confessed to despairing. Part of me wanted to just move on already and cut the tree down just to rid myself of the daily reminder from my kitchen window that it was dead, and thus avoid the pain that remembering caused me. I'm glad I didn't, because one day, long after I had stopped watching closely, I glimpsed a flash of green in passing. I stopped the car, jumped out, ran to inspect more closely, and it was It was alive and had been all this time, completely unbeknownst to any of us. But God knew, and the tree knew, and now so did I. I absolutely rejoiced. It made my day. I took so many pictures, it almost made me late to where I was going, but I'm glad I did, because it means I have one of those pictures to show you today. It'll be with me in the back for you guys to see as you leave. If my experience with the Carmel fire taught me anything, it is to look for living things, especially among the very, very dead. Even in the darkest, bleakest, worst of times, we have access to the voice of life. Let us not lose hope in the desert wilderness. New life is coming. We don't know when or how, but as people of faith, we trust in a God who regularly delivers the unimaginable. As we progress with Jesus and his disciples through Holy Week and Good Friday, we know what the tree knew and God knew all along. His disciples had no idea, as I had no idea with the tree, that there was a spark of life that would emerge on Easter morning. What could be more final than death? But our God is a God of life and redemption. God redeems the lost, dark, dry, and barren parts of our lives and relationships. Nothing is wasted in God's economy. God's life in Jesus is abundant and enough to nourish and provide for us in startlingly unexpected ways, especially in the bleakest of surroundings. As we wrap up our time in the Lenten wilderness, as we accompany Jesus and his disciples, as we too are his disciples, let us look ahead to the promises of new life and new hope that the Easter season brings. Let's forget the things of the past and look with open hearts and minds to the sudden shock of new life in a place of death. Can we bring ourselves to hope for or even expect a flourishing garden in the middle of a wasteland? To have faith of things presently unseen? We are people of hope and life, especially when all is dreary and dark and empty. God is doing a new thing. Do we not perceive it? Hang in there. As people of faith, this kind of hope is what defines us. We are assured of things we cannot see. It may seem all is lost. We are preparing for Christ's crucifixion. Is anything less hopeful than a corpse in a tomb? Let's be on the lookout in our lives, in areas of our lives that we have long concluded were dead and gone. Places we have decided there is no possible way new life could emerge. What life might spring forth when we least expect it? God seeks to awaken the dark corners of our souls, and God breathes life into places that have long been dark and desolate. Let us not give in to the temptation of despair. Whatever desert you may find yourself in, however bleak, be encouraged by the voice of another prophet, Habakkuk. Even though the fig trees have no blossoms and there are no grapes on the vines, even though the olive crop fails and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. There is life within, deep within. The darkness of despair does not have to have the last word. There will be streams of water in the desert. There will be a new thing. Let us press onward, slowly if we must, but determined. God has the final word, and the final word is hope. Do we not perceive it?